Buddham Saranam Gacchami Dhammam Saranam Gacchami Sangham Saranam Gacchami. Which means I take refuge in Buddha, I take refuge in his teachings, and I take refuge in the order that he has set forth. So today we shall see some of the teachings of this, one of the greatest teachers of the world, who, as all these great teachers have done, brought meaning to our lives, tries to tell us that what is the purpose and for what one should live, and tried basically to deliver us from the constant bane of our lives, that is suffering. We all want to get rid of suffering, and there are various ways suggested, but these great teachers gave the way which, when practiced, actually delivers a person from suffering completely and once for all. So, this idea was taught by Buddha in a very practical way. The religion that he gave didn't depend on any theory. It was the analysis of our own experience, logically connecting what we understand, and when we come to the conclusion, assiduously follow that conclusion in life to its logical end, so to say. So, we see that Buddha's these teachings are condensed in what is called the Four Noble Truths. The word noble needs a little attention. What is meant by truth? If we say just truth, is it not enough? Do we need to qualify it as noble truth, as if there are some unnoble truths? Because if we say noble truth, then there must be some unnoble truths also. Noble truth here actually shows a state of mind in which these truths become apparent to us. If our minds are not elevated to that state, then we do not have the instrument to see these truths. It is like the simple example, if a person is asked, do you see worms in yogurt? When you look at yogurt, do you see worms in yogurt? One would say, no, there are no worms. Well, but if you put microscope to your eye, then you will see tiny worms all over spread. In fact, that is how the yogurt gets made anyway. So it is, when you have the instrument, then you see something different. So, when our minds are in different states, at different states, different types of truths revealed to us. When the mind is risen to a level where the ultimate truths could be seen, then that is what is meant here by this noble truth. Not that we do not see them, but even though we see them, we do not see it, so to say, means we do not understand the meaning of it, we do not connect to it. This traditionally has a reference to his first seeing that how everybody is afflicted with the old age, sickness, and death, and how by detaching oneself with all these conditions through giving up or through renunciation one can become free from all these. He saw that on one day. I don't want to go into the details of it, but he got connected as himself with it. Every time he would see say an old person or a sick person, he would ask the charioteer, does it happen to everybody? Yes, it happens to everybody. Is it going to happen to me too? Yes, it's going to happen to you too. Everybody is subject to this. Now, he then decides to give up all his kingdom and so forth, all the wealth that he had. He had been married a little while, maybe a few years ago, and had a son born just 7 days back. And then he leaves his palace, goes to a forest, seeing that this all is impermanent and ultimately fraught with suffering. We see the pleasure part, but we do not see what is coming next from it in our life. So, a wise person is that who sees the effect before it comes and gets prepared for it. Like the weather forecast. Why do we see weather forecast? Because before a snowstorm comes or before a hurricane is approaching, let us get ready for that so that it won't affect us. So, to get ready, we need to see the effects of what is going to come in one's life. There will be many things may come, may not come, but some inevitable things would come in life. Like everyone, if lives long enough, is going to get old. Then there will be always sickness. It is today this is happening, tomorrow that is happening. That is the part of life, and we see this going on. There is nobody who can be called a perfectly healthy, never has to see a doctor, never has any health complaint. It is not possible. That once in our dispensary there, one lady, fairly old, she said, "Doctor, cure me completely. What is this that I have to come for taking medication every now and then? Give me such medicine by which I will get completely cured." Now the doctor wanted to make a little fun, tell things humorously, and then there was where we were sitting, just close by there was a railway line passing, He said, just as the train is coming, you go and lie on that railway track, and in a few minutes you will be completely cured forever of all these diseases. The idea is, if we are living, sooner or later our life will have some diseases. Everybody, it is inevitable. Old age, if we live long enough, old age is inevitable. In fact, everybody is old. So, in earlier forms of English, these days I don't hear the question framed like that, but in our childhood, it was always asked, "How old are you?" Nobody asked, "How young are you?" how old are you? So it is everybody is it kind of old. Somebody may be 3-year-old, somebody may be 30-year-old, somebody may be say 90-year-old, but it is we are all in a way old. How old, that is only the question. So old age, sickness and death, inevitable. You cannot have any doubt about this. This is going to happen. And to be able to see that it is going to happen and learn how we can protect ourselves from this whatever is going to happen for sure. So Buddha wanted to find the way. And then he had that experience of enlightenment under a tree. He went to different teachers, practiced different types of austerities, but then ultimately decided, no, I need to analyze everything properly. Let me put all my energy to that. Let me see the truth. And so he sat under a Bodhi tree and took a vow that unless and until he discovers this path that goes beyond his suffering, and unless and until he gets these answers, he is not going to get up from there. And the night passed, and then he started seeing the truth. He describes that layers after layers of ignorance started falling away. And he describes that how different 6 or 7 layers he has described, how these 7 layers gradually fell away, and he then became an illumined person. That is why he maintained that everybody is a Buddha in making, that he found the truth, everybody is capable of finding the truth, because we have that capability, we all have these experiences, and we have just to need to ponder over them. So therefore this is, when you come to that state, then you see those truths. So he saw these truths. We can intellectually understand these truths, but we do not have that nobility and purity of heart to actually feel that yes, they are truths. We do not experience them as true. So the first noble truth that is said is, all is fraught with suffering. In the Pali language in which he used to give sermons, the sermon says, all is fraught with suffering, dukkha ariya satcham, sarvam dukkham. So this sermon was given to 5 these spiritual aspirants in Benares, when after having this enlightened state, he walked to Benares. And there he delivered this first sermon to those 5 spiritual aspirants with whom once upon a time he had lived and tried to learn the practices that they were going through. So after learning, he saw that those practices are not going to lead to ultimate knowledge. So he parted their company. But then now he comes to them, because whom to give the sermon? So these were the students who actually were practicing, were working at it. So he called them. They were first not ready to come to Buddha. They were not even respectful of him. So because they thought that Buddha has now swerved from the path of righteousness. But then they came the leader of them, Kaundinya. So he addressed all of them, look, see these four noble truths, four truths of life. One is all is fraught with suffering. Everything is full of suffering. It is the beginning, it is suffering, middle it is suffering, end it is suffering. There is nothing in the world that is free from suffering. This is an important truth that we need to know, we need to remember. We understand it, yes, everything leads to suffering, but maybe later, let me first have the enjoyment. Later on it may lead to suffering, but who cares, we will cross the bridge when we come there, right now let us enjoy, and when the suffering comes, we will deal with it. But we are actually going towards suffering. Even what we call enjoyment is a different name, that's all, but it is not really the enjoyment as such, it is fraught with suffering. And this suffering, this is a great analysis, that this suffering has a cause, and therefore there is hope, If something is caused by something, you discover the cause, and then if you remove the cause, then the effect also is gone. So suffering has a cause. And so, if we can get rid of the cause, then suffering will go away. So, he gives what is called in Pali language, Pratitta Samutpad, that how logically, the chain of causation, he gives 12 different steps, that how one leads to another, and thus we get the sufferings, and then if we remove these causes, therefore how the suffering will go away. This is called in that the wheel of causation. It keeps on moving unless we remove this cause. So, and is there the third is, there is the cessation of the cause of suffering. There is the cessation, means there is a state when we can remove the cause. Because even if we know the cause, like I have, some problem in my foot, I discovered there are all the black marks and all that. And so I asked one doctor, what is this, why? He said, well, it is because of this it happens. Then I asked, can it be cured? He said, no. So even if there is, the cause, if you cannot get rid of the cause, then what is the point? But in case of this suffering, not only that you find the cause, but there is this cessation of the cause. And then fourth is, there is the path to end the suffering. This was, mainly the Buddha's first sermon, but our today's topic is more connected with his second sermon, which is elaboration on this first sermon. It is many times titled as Sermon of the Non-Self. In the first sermon, there is a seed of it, as you can read here, when Buddha says that everything is impermanent and devoid of self. He says anicca and anatta. Anicca means there is, everything is continuously changing, there is no permanence in anything. And therefore, the corollary is this, everything is anatta, there is no substance to it. So this became an important, very considered as a cornerstone. No self is considered a cornerstone of Buddhist doctrine and is often cited to distinguish it from Vedanta. Because Buddha says no self. It is, the stereotypes and the superficial understanding of it will be like this. Buddhism and Hinduism or Vedanta are completely different. They are opposite. Because Buddha says, no self. Vedanta says, self alone is. See how diametrically opposite it is. Buddha says, no self. And in the Vedanta classes, we always hear, if you turn Upanishads or Bhagavad Gita, you will always see self, Atma. And in Buddhist literature, Anatma. In many Buddhist schools, this has been really studied so much, and people were attached to it so much that out of it, that there was a big idea that they, instead of worshipping the self, let us worship Niratma. Instead of Atma, Niratma means there is no self. Let us worship that which is no self. And in fact, a goddess was manufactured that is called Niratma Devi. That it is that goddess of no self. So, in many Tibetan Buddhist temples, there is this goddess Niratma that remember, because we have to remember that there is no self. And so, to remember something, we have to concentrate on that, and so that for that concentration we use symbols. And that, like the picture of Buddha, picture of Sri Ramakrishna, picture of Jesus that you are seeing on altar, why are they there? Because with picture we can remember them, and by that we can remember their teachings, and thus it helps us to actually emphasize those teachings on our mind and implement them in our own lives. So therefore, this idea that Buddha said no self, a very prominently presented idea. So it needs to be seen that what exactly it means, what is the implication, and if we take it literally, then all Buddha's sermons also are not necessary, because if there is no self, no soul, then whom is he telling? And in the sermons you read this very beautiful idea again and again, that remember this. What does it indicate? That there is a continuity, that I heard something, then I remember that, and then again something else was told, I connect that to that. So there is some continuity even when Buddha is teaching. Therefore we also have the first sermon, the second sermon, third sermon. So if the idea had been that there is absolutely no continuity of soul, then even the instructions would have been of no use, because to who is going to take the instructions? So therefore what Buddha has said needs to be understood. Many different Buddhist schools, they have therefore done a lot of exegesis on what Buddha has actually meant by this. And the second sermon is really illustrative of that. First, let me quote from a beautiful article by Anindita Balslev. Dr. Anindita Balslev is a scholar of philosophy, and she has written extensively on consciousness. And one chapter in this book, that the enigma of consciousness, I consciousness, enigma of I consciousness, it has a chapter on the Buddhist ideas. And I am quoting from this book. Buddhism as a tradition forthright decries the notion of self as an unwarranted assumption. The idea was seen from the outset as logically absurd and psychologically redundant. This reading is closely tied up with the idea of universal flux, which is central to Buddhist thought. So this is the underlying position that everything is impermanent. There is nothing permanent here. And it has been shown that how everything is subject to constant change. And again I quote from the next paragraph. In the Buddhist conceptual world, there is no room for any immutable core that can even remotely be considered to be the vestige of permanence in the midst of change. Consequently, the initial theory-making endeavors by the sophisticated Buddhist philosophers led to a thorough refutation of the idea of universal, the permanent, and the substance. So, the second sermon of Buddha actually is the basis for all this philosophical discussion about what is this self. And the way Buddha deals with it is, see that what is this that you call as I? This second sermon was given to the same five initial disciples in the same place, Benares, and then he speaks to them that it is a little away from Benares actually, Ishipatan, that there he gave this discourse, form. Form, O monks, is not self. Some translations say the body is non-self. We can see this. I am trying to show how this same idea comes in Vedanta as well, especially the non-dual Vedanta students can really see that it sounds very familiar, that the body is not self. Those who come for the various classes and lectures here, they have heard it a million times, that body is not I. Yes, so Buddha says that the body is not the self. Then the forms are not self, means a particular rupa, because it is again a conglomeration. Then he continues, perception, is it self? He shows that perception is also not self, because he shows everything that perception is impermanent, the form is impermanent. Mental formations, O monks, they are also not self. And then he says consciousness, means becoming aware of something, is not self. So it is thus all these being non-self. What do you think then the self is? In Buddhist discussion, this idea comes very often. In Vedanta as well, you can see this same thing, like the Shankaracharya's famous hymn, that Mano Buddhi Ahankara Chittani Naham, I am not the mind, I am not the body, I am not the ego, and so forth. I am not any of these. So it is exactly the same. But the last line in each of those verses of Shankaracharya that emphasizes that I am the existence absolute, I am the bliss absolute, I am the knowledge absolute. That is missing here. And so that what is seen is all impermanent and all separate, and we give it a name, I. What is the substance of these discourses is, well, you have like a chariot, you have the wheels, you have the horses, you have a box-like thing where people can sit. Then there is there are the reins. All these are different things. When put together in a particular way, then you call it a chariot. So is a chariot permanent? If all these constituents are impermanent, then what is a chariot apart from all these? So, what is this I that you are talking about? Where is it? If you say body is not I, mind is not I, the perceptions are not I, then what is I? There is nothing like that. It is just a word, because of which you get an illusion that there is something like I. And so, Buddha says, there is no I. And so, this is, and that everything is therefore impermanent. To know this, and so the idea is very beautiful actually, that yes, when we know these things are all impermanent, what will be the result? We will not get caught in them. We will not get attached to them. That is the main thrust of the argument actually. That it is because when you know something is not permanent, immediately we lose attachment for it. Like the seat that you occupy in a train or a plane, the moment you know that it is not permanent, you are sitting there for a couple of hours, and so you never get attached to it. You know that you have to leave it after say couple of hours or so. So when you leave it without any suffering for leaving it. You don't shed tears like, oh my dear seat, I have to leave you, and nothing, no such thing there at all, because we are actually aware that those are all impermanent things. So when we know about this idea of I, then we will not worry about then what happens to me, then who is my so and so. They are all impermanent connections. Just as somebody sitting by your side in a plane journey, what happens? You maybe start talking, form some kind of a connection, but it is an impermanent connection. So also in this journey of life, things come together. And then for a while travel together, that's about it. It is like I was coming from, this Los Angeles to Boston, and then I was going to come to Providence from there. So some other passengers, we were talking together. When at Boston we got down, till then we were together, but then I went my way, this fellow went his way. So it's like that. Things are not permanently connected. Nothing is permanent there. Each of these constituents being impermanent, their congregation, when they are brought together, they are put together, their conglomeration that we call I is also impermanent. There is nothing like that. It is just a name that is given. And that is what even our body is. That all these different particles, we say, yes, this body, but it is subject to change. So this idea of impermanence of the self is emphasized so that we develop the detachment for this world and for what we call I. This has a historical background also. When Buddha was teaching these doctrines, then there was a misunderstanding of Vedanta that the world is illusory. And that is commonly told in Vedanta, the world is illusory. But what it actually, the idea that comes to us is what I see, this world is illusory, but I am permanent. That is a very wrong understanding of Vedanta. That this world means from this body onwards out there is all unreal and impermanent and so forth, but this is kind of permanent. It is, and thus this misleading understanding had pervaded everything. Thus what happens is, oh, that is all illusory. We don't need to do any spiritual practice because it is all illusory, you see, after all. We do not need to serve others, we don't need to help others because it is all illusory. It is not real. So Buddha actually gave this corrective dose, that, oh, not just that, what you call as I, that too is equally illusory. There is no substance to that. That too is part of this illusory understanding. What the same word is used by Buddha as well as the various Vedanta schools as well, avidya, that ignorance. Because of avidya, this delusion, and this delusion has this idea I. This impermanence that is being told is not actually the impermanence or the denial of the underlying absolute truth as such. Therefore, when Buddha was asked that just as Buddha's noble truths are famous, Buddha's noble silence is also famous. And that it is that Buddha's noble silence on question that is soul same as body or different from body. He remained silent on many, observed silence on many such philosophical questions. Because he understood, saw that either way he gave answer, the listener is not going to correctly understand it. Also, that is not important at that stage. It is important to elevate oneself with practicing this eightfold noble path that he was telling. That is the fourth noble truth. That follow this eightfold noble path and the truth will shine forth itself. So, it is, there are this noble silence of Buddha that is interpreted therefore differently by different schools. If we actually literally or understand that Buddha completely discarded the idea of I, then it is not really, it doesn't make sense, because Buddha told that all the Jataka Katha, the Jataka tales in Buddhism, which forms a very big part of the literature of Buddhism, Jataka tales, becomes meaningless. Because there Buddha tells previously this was Bodhisattva, before that this was Bodhisattva. So there is a continuity indicated there. Now, all these different schools therefore they try to make sense of what is presented in this idea of that what is meant by the I being unreal or anatma. And many actually have come to this very conclusion. There is difference in them, like there is a school called Sautantrika, there is a school called Vaibhashika, there is the Yogachara school, there is the Madhyamika school. If we see their literature in various different ways, they see or try to show that the ultimate truth or reality is not non-existent, and if one calls that as I, it is a different thing. So even the great Vedanta teacher Gaudapada was Shankaracharya's teacher's teacher. So Gaudapadacharya has written a verse commentary on one of the shortest Upanishads, that is the Mandukya Upanishad. His verse commentary, it is called Gaudapada Karika. Karika means a particular verse commentary. So in one of those verses, he mentions that, well, many say that there is then no self at all, but naitad buddhena bhashitam. Actually, Buddha didn't say that. Buddha observed silence. Because if you say, well, the self is body, then, well, that is not true. If the self is not body, then that is also not, meaningless. It is some such questions one cannot answer. Like a famous example given, since when you stop beating your wife? Now means if you say, can you give a date, means that before that as if it were you were beating your wife. So you cannot give an answer to such questions, you see. So this is a question that cannot be answered yes or no, or this or this. Very difficult to properly answer this question, and therefore Buddha left it unanswered. It is self is or is not. Well, we ourselves find it out by going on this what is called eightfold noble path. The practical answer we will discover ourselves, and there we shall see that this non-existence or impermanence of all forms will be actually apparent in our life. We will see that everything that we consider very dear, everything that we consider very valuable, we will see that it is not permanent. It is therefore not permanent. In that sense, it is not real. So, what appears as a conglomeration of body, mind, this, that, and we give it the name soul, in Vedanta also, in Upanishads, you will see that soul is called the misperception of consciousness associated with body and mind and so forth. That gets called as soul, and therefore it is not real, it is not there. So in that sense, this soul is not there. It is not that the absolute self has been denied. There is no possibility of denial of that, since it is absolute. It is not for me or you or anybody to deny that. It is only the relative that one can deny. That which I see that or the about which I can think of, I can say that it is not real by seeing its impermanence. And impermanence is equated for being unreal. So permanence, reality; impermanence, unreality. So in that sense, the soul is considered unreal. So main idea, the thrust in this is follow the Eightfold Noble Path as described by Buddha. Our lives will get transformed accordingly, and then we shall be able to see the truth of our life, freeing us from suffering. That is the goal, to go beyond all sufferings, and by following the Eightfold Path we will be able to do that. Thank you, friends.